So I was in the VIMD area and had a lot of work-related sites ranging from downtown Baltimore to Virginia Beach and all around. Friday wrapped up and I hit the road to some social arrangements I had made for the weekend. Spent the weekend with friends out in various parts of VI, got dragged off to other places even further out, the usual weekend fun times. It's late Sunday night when I have to leave, or I'm not going to be able to get home in time to start my, thankfully late afternoon, Monday. I'm fully rested, I didn't do any drinking, I'm not into Calaxian. On the highway at about 3 a.m., in the middle of bumfleeb nowhere between Roanoke and DC, absolutely nobody around. I'm cruising along in the left lane simply because nobody else is around. No headlights for the past hour, no tail lights either. No road lamps either. It's dark, it's mildly damp, it's foggy. I have the music up, I'm feeling good, all is fine. And then I just happen to look to the left, and there is a fleeing dog barking at me. A German Shepherd, in a car passenger seat, somewhat blue glow from the instruments inside the car, and it's got its face to its window, and it's barking its head off at me. I get a good hard look at it too, because at first my brain is not registering, cop car, dummy. I'm doing 90 plus in a 75, I promptly have the oh snap moment when the dog, the instruments, the white Crown Vic light bar all click in my brain after a second hard look. I put my foot on the brakes and start slowing down hard but safe to pull over. I even put my blinker on to start shifting lanes over to the right to pull over because. Wait. There is no shoulder on the left side of this road. I look back to my left where there is still no shoulder room for another car and it's just gone. No trace. I slammed my brakes and stopped in the middle of the fleeing highway, flipped on all my light bars, and even looked around with my handheld spot. There was nothing. No tail lights, no headlights, no engine sounds, nothing. There are no other tire marks in the damp but mine, and I can see for a nice long distance both ways, too. Nothing. My vehicle had great visibility and a lot of extra lighting, off-road SUV with the trimmings. There is no possible way somebody pulled a sneaky, let alone drove that fast on wet sloped grass and rocks on my left side. So, yep. There you have it. Ghost cop and his dog didn't like me speeding, apparently. When I was doing the long haul thing, I was driving through Oklahoma, don't remember exactly where, but it was late at night and I was already tired. Well, I was driving along and saw what I thought was a Grim Reaper, looked in my mirrors and didn't see it. At that point I decided that, regardless of how many hours I have left on my log, I'm stopping the next chance I get to rest. Later that night after getting parked, I turned on my CB and heard someone talking about a bad accident just a few miles beyond where I had stopped. After asking how long ago it happened, it turned out that if I had kept going, I would have been caught up in it. In 2003 when I was a senior in high school, or perhaps the summer after we graduated, a friend and I were coming home from somewhere I don't recall and traveling down Murfreesboro Road in between Smyrna and the Borough, Tennessee. It was really dark and really foggy that night. Suddenly, a really strong feeling came over me to tell my friend to change lanes. As I opened my mouth to say something, she started changing lanes and told me she didn't know why but, long story short, she had the same feeling. A few seconds later, just about the time we were going to shrug it off, a big boat of an old car came flying down the lane we were in at what had to be well over 100 miles per hour, without a single light on, front or rear. It was moving so fast that it disappeared into the distance just as quickly as it had appeared. We pulled over, thanked our lucky stars and headed back home with the high beams on for the rest of the drive home. I have an uncle that was a truck driver in his youth, and he told all sort of stories about the things he encountered while on the roads of Brazil's countryside. He said that there was a road in the north, maybe northwestern, part of the country that the truckers always said to avoid. Once he had a scheduled delivery and he was late, so he said to himself, "Fleed that and took the aforementioned road because it looked like it would be a good shortcut." At some point of the night, while driving, his truck simply stopped working. Dead. Like the battery died or something. After 5 minutes in the complete darkness, he saw lights at the sky, slowly passing over his truck. He tried the ignition again. Nothing. So he just sat there, scared fleebless, watching the lights go by. The lights eventually went away and after something like 20 or 30 minutes, his truck started working again and he followed his way. My dad told me and my brothers this story when we were growing up, and it's always stuck with me, particularly on long drives when I'm feeling a bit sleepy. The first time I remember hearing it was after I asked him if angels were real. I was probably 7 or 8 years old. He drove trucks decades ago, before I was born, and before labor laws around limits and brakes were more standard. I'm assuming it's different now. He'd fairly regularly accept calls that would extend his shift to where he was driving 24, 36 hours or more without a break longer than a quick bathroom or fast food stop. My dad has a pretty mathematical brain. He's the type to make up logic puzzles out of something totally mundane just for fun. Whenever we were driving around town, he'd regularly ask me things like how long would it take us to get from home to the store if we were going 30 miles per hour but had to stop for 5 minutes in the middle because a family of kittens were crossing the road, etc. He'd come up with similar equations for himself while he was driving solo that involved things he was seeing like the odometer, mileage markers, the time, and then he could test his speed based on the equation, etc. One night after having already driven a particularly long day, he noticed his eyes getting droopier and the whole roll down the window and blast a music up thing didn't seem to be helping much. It was a rainy night on a pretty windy mountain road without a shoulder to pull over safely, so he started doing those logic games out loud to keep alert and awake. He was saying something to the effect of, "I just passed mile marker 146, so what time will it be when I reach 200 if I'm going 55 miles per hour?" Then he closed his eyes, took a deep breath, and felt his head do the nod-jerk thing which woke him up with a gasp. He opened his eyes to see he was driving straight towards mile marker 158, which would have sent his whole truck tumbling down a random mountain ravine. He was able to correct the course safely back, but it was a matter of seconds between that reality and certain death. He insists to this day that he slept through 12 miles of windy mountain road, going 60+ miles per hour, only to wake up right at the last moment between life and death. The story usually ends with him tearing up saying, "I don't know if there's angels, but I know there's something bigger going on in this universe than our human brains have been able to understand yet. If I wouldn't have woken up right when I did, you kids wouldn't be here today, and that's something that feels pretty close to spiritual." My dad has told me this story a couple times and each time it always kind of weirds me out. He is not a trucker, but when he was in the military one night, him and a buddy went out to get food. About halfway into their drive down a dark road, my dad and his buddy noticed a woman in a red dress with black hair walking. My dad and his buddy found it odd because it didn't seem safe and it wasn't that warm. My dad said deep down he knew stopping was a bad idea, and so they drove by a little more slowly to get a glimpse to see if she needed help. As they drove by, my dad and his friend both swear she has no face. Instead, there was just a black hole as if she had been in a wreck and her face was taken off. It freaked them both out so badly my dad floored it, and when they stopped to eat, both of them agreed they saw the same thing. Come to find out, a woman had passed earlier that year in an accident. They were talking about it when a stranger told them the sightings of the woman were actually common. I might be a little too late for anyone to see this, but about my 3rd year into my career, I was taking a load of paper from Alabama to Ohio. Well, the paper mill I loaded at was in the middle of BFE and was probably 65 miles away from the nearest interstate. I was a little low on my legal driving hours, so I figured I would spend the night at the shipper. Well, the shipper doesn't allow overnight parking. Great. So I get loaded and roll out. I set my GPS for the nearest truck stop, which was 70 miles. There was one closer, but it didn't have showers according to Google reviews. So I'm rolling along this winding country road just taking my time because it's dark. I flip my high beams on when I get to a straight section of the road and I can see a figure walking. I remember thinking how brave they must be. Well, as I get closer, I notice the figure is a man in an all-white suit. As my lights uncovered more of him, I noticed he had a bag slung over his shoulder, not a big one, but big enough to notice. As I started to ease the truck over to the left side of the road to pass by him, he turned and stuck his thumb out as if to hitch a ride. Now I normally wouldn't have a problem with that, except the fact that when he turned towards the truck, the place where his face was supposed to be was completely red and blank. No eyes. No nose. No mouth. Blank. Red and blank. I must have hit my door lock button about 30 times. I made it to the truck stop and waited until daylight to take my shower. I don't know what I saw that night, but whatever it was, it cannot ride with me. My dad is a long-haul driver and told me this story years ago. He was in Detroit trying to find some factory in the middle of the night and was a bit lost and ended up having to drive through a really sketchy area, pre-GPS and cell phone days. As he was entering the area, he gets pulled over by a cop. The cop says to him something to the effect of, "You must be lost, even we don't go through that area at night." My dad, being the stubborn person he is, tells the cop he has to get to where he's going and has already lost enough time trying to get back on course and needs to go through the area. The cop proceeds to tell him not to stop for anything. Tells him to roll through stop signs and red lights, and if anyone steps out in front of his truck, flag him down to turn them into a grease spot on the road and we'll deal with it in the morning. He made it through without incident, but I imagine he was soiling himself the entire time, considering a police officer told him that running red lights and vehicular man-ending were better options than stopping his truck. I work for a premium off-road lighting company, so we work in the deserts at night a lot, usually with trophy truck and Ultra 4 race teams. Last year, I was coming home from King of the Hammers, and it was about 4:30 a.m., and I was on a state highway through the desert in southern New Mexico. If you've never driven it, you're basically as far away from anything out in the desert as you can possibly be. Impossibly straight one-lane highways that stretch from hundreds of miles. I was awake and alert even though it was so late, and I was totally alone on the road and had been for hours. Suddenly, without warning, while I was trucking along going about 80 miles per hour, the most insanely bright light came on right off my tailgate. It was so bright it lit up everything in the cab and was so blinding. I thought one of our race teams had snuck up behind me or something and turned on their light bars to screw with me. I drive a wrapped and branded distinct show truck, so it happens a lot. The light stayed on my tail for a good 30 seconds and would stay right on my tail even when I'd swerve a bit or when I moved onto the shoulder a bit to see if they would pass. It was weird, it was like the light was bolted to the back of my truck or something. After about 30 seconds I had enough, so I flipped on my rear-facing lights to give them a taste of their own medicine, and instantly the light behind me went off and there was nothing. Nothing whatsoever. Even though I was kind of blinded, I have some really powerful backup lights, and they came on the second the other light went out, so there is no way whatsoever another vehicle was behind me, and there was just wide open flat desert all around, so it's not like they could have pulled off and hidden, and I would have seen them anyways. Just nothing. I was totally freaked out, but I'm not an easy scare and very comfortable with being in the desert alone at night, so I pulled over, grabbed my knife and my flashlight, and had a look around. I shone my flashlight all around and even used some of my portable hyperspots. Again, I work for a lighting company and always carry around tons of demo lights to look all around me for anything, and there was nothing. No cars, no trucks, aircraft, UFOs, nothing at all except wide open, empty New Mexico desert. My truck was totally fine, but I know I wasn't just seeing things because the back of my truck was hot, like way hotter than normal. All the metal on the bedsides and tailgate was almost uncomfortable to the touch. This isn't my story, but an old friend of mine's. In the 90s, John was an IT guy in parts of eastern Iowa and far west Illinois. He was used to driving from one account to another either late at night or early in the morning. He'd pick a halfway point to use a rest stop and to grab one of those awful paper cup coffees from the machines while he was there. One early morning about 4:30 a.m., he was in Iowa and he stopped at a wide spot in the road rest stop. He parked and there weren't any other people there except for a couple of semis who looked like they had been there for quite a while. He went into the men's room and it was deserted. He used the bathroom and went to the sink to wash his hands. He said he caught some movement from the corner of his eye and there was a very tall, very thin man standing right in the middle of the entrance about 15 feet away. He was dressed all in black and he says that the guy's eyes were pitch black. The man was giggling to himself and John swore he was at least 8 feet tall. He glanced down to grab a paper towel from the machine, and when he looks up, this man is so close he can hear him breathing with a loud bubbly sound. There's no way he could have crossed 15 feet in 1 second. As he told it, this thing slowly smiled at him, and it wasn't a smile. It was a bearing of serrated, sharp teeth, and this thing starts chuckling like he's looking at a 3-piece KFC meal. My friend screams, "Jesus help me," and runs for his car. My friend says the thing is startled, like he wasn't supposed to be able to move. He felt like he should have been frozen, like staring at a snake. He runs to his car, which wasn't locked, slams the locks down, starts the car and floors it getting out of there. As he's leaving, he looks in the rear view and this thing is running after the car. He always swore somehow this thing followed him home. He was paralyzed in an accident not long after, and I went to care for him for a little while. I brought my 4-year-old son with me and in his typical baby way, he would chatter away while the two of us were talking. I asked him one day who he was talking to. My son said, he says his name is Biter. He has long teeth and he lives with Mr. John. I grabbed my son and ran out of there. I never went back to that house. My dad was a trucker and in the summers, I tagged along with him. One evening, we were driving from Houston to Jacksonville and somehow we got turned around on the back roads of Louisiana. The last major place I remembered us being in was Troy at about 1 a.m. Well, it was almost 3 and we had no idea where we were. We eventually came to this little bitty town. It had one broken stoplight, a diner, an abandoned factory, and some empty shopping centers. In total, it was maybe 4 blocks from one end to the other. We were both hungry and because we didn't want to wait to go to a truck stop, we pulled in behind the diner. Now that I think about it, the fact that a small town diner was open at 3 a.m. should have been a sign that something was amiss. We get in and this diner is pretty nice actually. A bit old school, reminiscent of the 60s. There's a single waitress on duty and a cop eating in a booth. We naturally all got to chatting. I remember that meal so clearly because it was the first time I had grits. They were loaded with cheese and bacon. The cop gave us directions back to the highway and bought me a chocolate milk for the road. I even remember the tables. They were composite wood covered in polka dot contact paper. Well, we eventually made it to civilization, and later that morning at a stop, my dad asks about the town. Cue a lot of confused local truckers. He was sure he was getting the name right, but no one had heard of it. A few months later he was driving me back home to Texas and he drove through Louisiana attempting to find the town. We never could. We're still not sure what happened, if we drove through a ghost town no one remembered or something weirder. But I remember that night clearly.